In this video, we're going to talk about winter preparation for any WRX. This is my 2022 WRX. I've made a video for my 2016 and 2015 WRX. This video really applies if you own a WRX or even a Subaru, and how you can approach prepping your car for winter, whether it's salty roads, snow, rain and salt, whatever the conditions are. And we're going to talk about whether you're stock or whether you're modified and how those two approaches differ, and what you can do to just prepare your car to last the absolute longest during your lifespan and avoid issues that might actually cost you money. Here's the deal. Most of us think that we can just drive these cars through the winter with no issues, and that is absolutely not the case. I've owned WRXs for the last 7 years of my life, and I've had just about every problem. Although these cars feel like they are rust-proof, they very much aren't. I will say they don't rust as much as other cars, but they do spot rust sometimes if you don't take care of them, and you can have other issues like seizing bolts, issues with, general maintenance, issues where parts start to fail because either they do rust out. These cars are prone to problems if you don't take care of them in the winter, and we're gonna get into it. We're gonna actually start with some of the modified cars, and if you have a stock car, listen through the end, but even with the modifications, it's worth listening to. I promise you guys, if you own a WRX, you're thinking about a WRX, an STI, a Subaru, watch the entire video. There's gonna be tons of nuggets of information for you on general care. But because the modified folks, there's only a few changes that you'd make before you do the same thing as the stock. We're gonna quickly talk about those first. Regardless of how modified you are, there's a few rule of thumbs with your car. If you have any aftermarket modifications at all, this is the list of what you should do. If you have aftermarket wheels, make sure they are okay driving through snow that's frozen, and your tires are in relatively good condition. Often, a lot of us put on our stock wheels during the winter. If you have aftermarket coilovers, this is a big one. Go back to stock or clean them regularly. So coilovers are one of those big things. Where the stock setup, it will do pretty good in wintry conditions. Over my years in the aftermarket community, we've noticed, and it's pretty clear, that aftermarket coilovers do not hold up well if they get packed with snow, salt, grime, grit, if they're not cleaned regularly. So if you're not going back to your stock coilover setup, make sure you're getting in there and rinsing out and washing your coilover setup. I would really just say rinse it out, get all the grit, the salt off. Maybe every couple days, or if there's a lot of snow and grit on the ground, maybe once a day after a drive through the storm. Make sure you're regularly cleaning those. That's also true with any other suspension parts. It's a blanket statement. If you're putting in an aftermarket suspension parts, make sure you're cleaning them regularly. They're not made with the same metals. If you have any aftermarket electronics, make sure after your first drive that you're not getting any seepage. I mean exterior. So this is your taillights, your headlights, and that kind of thing. Although aftermarket taillights and headlights are pretty damn good these days, every once in a while they will leak, and sometimes they won't leak enough for you to notice. Let's say you might get a little water passage through behind the lens, but what can get really bad is if your county, your town, your city either coats the roads prior to the winter or put salt down, it'll pull the salt through with that water and it will fog the lens. Now, fogging the lens can be cumbersome. I've actually seen it happen quite a few times, and it means actually removing and taking apart the entire taillight or headlight assembly, especially if you've done aftermarket headlights on your VA WRX. This is something that you want to make sure they are properly sealed, because getting a little bit of salt or chemical pull through can do actually a lot of damage, and it can actually corrode a lot of the interior parts of your headlight assembly. I just saw maybe 2 weeks ago somebody that hadn't fully sealed their headlight back up, and it really ate away at the interior of the headlight to the point where they're gonna have to replace the entire headlight. If you have any aftermarket pieces on your car that you had to drill or replace something that had an existing drilled hole, this is an example. I didn't have to drill this, but if I had an aftermarket wing or something, but I do have exposed holes that enter into the trunk because I didn't reuse the bolts because I didn't really feel like I needed to. These are actually places where salt or chemicals or water can get into the car. So it's a really good time to make sure that they are watertight. So what I typically do before the winter is I pull my hood up, remove the liner, and make sure I don't have any evidence of leaks. So I'm not pulling salt or things through into the car or even around those holes, because the cutout of the hole and on the inside of the car, these cars aren't protected for rust, so that's where you can show some signs of rust. You can also get spot rust underneath these because they've been on the car so much that sometimes you don't get the same paint protection. It sounds ridiculous, it sounds like it should be perfectly new, but I've seen it before. I've installed a lot of front lips for people, I've installed a lot of aftermarket wings, and you see it a lot. You remove it and you'll get some spot rusting. And lastly, it's actually your exhaust. If you have an aftermarket exhaust, this is the biggest thing where you can lose your money. Aftermarket exhausts are not made with the best materials. Although they are really good, they are not perfect and they're not mass produced like OEM exhausts. What does that mean? They rust, they corrode, sometimes a lot of it's surface rust. The gaskets go because they corrode, and the bolts lock. They fully lock and can get really damaged. So if you have an aftermarket exhaust in your car, especially one that you care about, and you're driving in any area where it gets cold, there's a coating on the road, or there's salt and sand down, you must be doing under washes on your car at minimum once a week. And if you drive through a storm or something where you know a lot of salt and stuff is getting kicked up underneath your car, you've got to be washing the underside of your car after that storm. This is critical. This will both help you keep your exhaust in the long term, make sure you don't have to replace hardware constantly if you ever have to make any changes, and also protect your resale value if you ever want to sell the exhaust when you part out your car. This one is super critical. I've rusted out plenty of exhausts, even cleaning them once a week, so I clean them after every single storm to protect myself. All right, so let's say you're stock though, and this applies to everyone, modified or stocked. A few things you can do from a maintenance perspective: get your oil changes and your fluids done out of the way so you're not doing them when it's cold out. That's self-explanatory. But the bigger things that you can do is when you start the winter season, and it's not too late, I know it's already February, and you know, especially in the Boston area, you can probably see some snow in the background here. It's not crazy yet, but it's gonna get crazy. What you can do is wash and wax your car. This is a time where you can use a pretty heavy application of wax, and I even like to not buff my wax out fully because I want to leave some of that material on. What that does is it helps salt come off the car when I spray it down, and I don't have to do a full wash. And the same goes with snow. It just helps stuff not stick to the car. It creates a barrier. Some people ceramic coat, but I find in New England and places that get heavy snow, ceramic coat is a little bit dangerous because a lot of ceramic coatings aren't tested for super cold temperatures and extended periods of ice on the car. They say they are, but I've seen some pretty horrific things on some really nice cars where people are like pulling their clear coat off. It's insane when the ice comes off. But with that said, you can get a good wax on the car, and that will do a lot. What you can also do is you can fully wash the underside of your car with a car grade soap. And what that's gonna do is that's gonna get all the grime off your car that stuff like salt and snow are gonna adhere to and create spot or surface rusting, which could then penetrate to a further issue with rust. This is also a really good time to replace your windshield wipers with something that's good for a snowy condition or winter conditions. If it rains in your area when it's the winter, it's a good time to replace yourself with some new wiper blades. That's super important. And then my favorite thing is windshield wiper fluid. Make sure you're topped off, and if you live in a snowy area, find something that does some type of ice melt. That makes a huge difference, especially with these WRXs where we have a lot of glass. We've got our fishbowl, and it takes a little bit longer to get things heated up. Another big thing with these cars is make sure you do your tire rotation. When you're in an environment where you are going to be using the all-wheel drive for some functionality, that's where you can actually experience the highest levels of odd wear, let's say, or uneven wear. So if you already have some uneven wear and you're putting a lot more friction on the tires to get yourself out of a situation or an event that's not typical, you know, pavement or concrete to tire contact, it can do funky things. So make sure you do a proper tire rotation and you get a little bit of mileage after that tire rotation. And it's probably also a good time to do an alignment on these cars. If you don't align these cars often, they will hate you long term and you'll have to spend a lot of money. We know that. Align your tires. Get yourself in alignment often. I'd say minimum once every 18 months, but really once a year, and especially after every tire rotation. I highly recommend doing it. Now here's where we get into the piece of this video that it's a little bit more conjecture and it's personal experience. Everything we've talked about before then are just general recommendations for the car, but there are a few things that I find actually way more important about these cars than in the winter, and specifically for Subarus and WRXs and STIs specifically. You have to do things more like preparation around snow specifically and salt that are maybe a little bit more, let's say, higher maintenance, but if you want to take the best care of your car and have the best experience long term, these are the things that you want to do. So first and foremost, you have to understand these cars are not designed to drive in heavy snow. So if you live in a heavy snow environment, you've got to understand, do not push through snow for a multitude of reasons. One, we have really soft plastic down by my feet, you know, where the lip is. If you have a lip, you can tear that off. We've got really soft plastics. We have a fairly exposed engine block, and snow can damage that and get into places with salt that you really don't want it to be. Now that's a little bit more care. The other big piece that I like to do is I like to do an engine spray down every once in a while in the winter. This is probably not entirely necessary, but it's protecting me in the long term if I want to have the car for a long time. Again, this is more of a reflection of the patterns that I've noticed with this car for like underspray with the tires, where that underspray is routed. You get a little blow through kind of coming off the sides of the front tires that kind of come up and into the underside of the car. And if you drive in a lot of like dusty areas, you can see this more often because I've taken because I've taken my WRXs in dusty areas and it's a little bit more indicative, but you can see the dust in the engine bay, which should tell you it's not just coming through the front of the car. We're getting a little spray. You can see the spray patterns like kind of on the inner sides of your engine bay. It's through like a very, very small opening, so it's not significant, but the short answer is I like to do a spray down maybe like every 3 to 4 weeks, and that's just long-term prevention. The other thing with these cars, especially the 2022 Plus, is we don't have a lot of barrier between when you're inside the car and your floor mats and the carpeting and the bottom side of the like aluminum, the actual metal of the car. It's not fully aluminum, obviously, but the actual like frame of the inside of the car. If you don't believe me, especially with the 2022, there's actually some access doors on the bottom of your passenger side carpet and underneath your seat. The same thing goes with the VA, the access doors just aren't as large, but that carpet doesn't have a waterproof barrier. So something that people don't usually understand is that if you get into your car and your feet are wet or they have salt on it, you're exposing a part of the interior of the car that doesn't have the same protection on the exterior against rust and stuff to those, liquids, salt, things that will rust your car. So it's really important to understand that if you do a lot of like wet, if you're in a wet environment, you're in a snowy environment, you're in a salty environment, you need to understand you need to have floor mats that really protect that. And you need to be very cognizant of your wet feet, because you are going to expose your car and areas of your car that aren't protected by rust to a rusty, a rust kind of like a rust positive environment, let's say. And I've actually seen this in the past. I went and looked at a 2015 WRX, because if you follow the channel, I'm trying to buy a wrecked or a WRX that needs rebuilding to do a project on it. And I went and I pulled underneath the driver's seat up, and there was like a significant amount of interior rust in a car that's a 2015 Subaru. So you'd be surprised. And it was enough of a project just there that I was like, I don't want to take this on, because if that says anything about the care there, the rest of the car is probably not cared for, but it's something to think about. I will also say this is a little bit more nitty and gritty, but if you've had these WRXs for a long time, whatever year you have, the way Subaru makes seats, if you don't have like the leather seats, it's absolutely impossible to get salt or water stains out of it. It's like a real big pain in the butt. So I would just be a little cognizant of that like if you are wet, it's hard to get that crap out of these seats. And finally, guys, the last piece is just safety. And it's something that I really wanted to talk about, because we're seeing a few videos on these Facebook groups more and more of people driving these WRXs and getting into horrific crashes in the winter because they think they're driving this invincible rally car that can do anything. The truth is, these cars are absolutely fantastic in the snow and you can drive them pretty aggressively. I don't recommend doing that unless you have, actually I don't ever recommend doing that, but if you've properly built your car with like snow tires, wide wheels, all those things, and you've like made your car, you can do a little bit more than other people. But you also have to understand that if you see a WRX doing a little bit more dangerous things and you don't have a fully prepped car to do that, you don't have anywhere near the capability. And even then, you need to be safe in these cars. So while I've had plenty of fun and I filmed some of the fun on this channel, go check out the videos where I had some fun in snow, you need to be super careful because people are getting into horrific accidents. I know in just one of the Facebook communities, I saw an accident that somebody had filmed about a WRX where it kind of like slid into an 18-wheeler. The odds of them being okay are probably pretty low, but just be careful with these cars. Understand that they are not perfect. They are good in the snow, but they are not perfect. So the last piece of winter preparation, just be safe and value the person and people sitting in the car as you're driving. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Hopefully you learned something. Hopefully you take on all these practices to make sure your car survives the winter wherever you live. And I'll see you guys in the next video.